In June 2467, Archon Alistair Marsden Steiner was brutally assassinated within his own bedchambers by a gang of knife-wielding students. After a lengthy interrogation, they confessed to being sent by Michael Reynolds, Duke of Fatima and the Archon's half-brother. He was the son of Catherine Steiner through her second marriage, and his own betrothal to Zafina Tamar, last of the once mighty noble house, made him perhaps second only to Alistair in political power. The students believed that by killing the Archon, they could clear a path for the descendant of two of the Lyran Commonwealth's founding families to take the throne. Despite overwhelming evidence against him, the new Archon, Michael Steiner, postponed judgment on his uncle until the Lyran Intelligence Corps could conduct a thorough investigation. His decision proved wise, as they instead uncovered evidence that pointed to Graf Alphonse de Simon as the man behind the plot, retaliation for being stripped of his lands by Reynolds. The Duke of Fatima was pardoned, and the Graf executed for treason. Order was restored to the Commonwealth. On October 14, 2471, the Lyran capital of Tharkad played host to a grand double wedding for the ruling family. Archon Michael Steiner was to marry Grafina von Loch-Lomar Regina McKeeston, while his brother, General of the Armies Stephen Steiner, married Duchess of Gallery Margaret Olsen. What should have been a glorious celebration was marred by tragedy, however, as on the eve of the wedding, their sister Tatiana Steiner took her own life after a long fight with clinical depression. The ceremony went ahead regardless, but the after effects of this union nearly brought down the Great House, in a period of Lyran history known as the Dark Years. Within a month, a terrible earthquake struck the Triad, resulting in the deaths of 63 members of the Lyran Estates General, as well as the Archon's wife, Regina. House McKeeston, who had founded the Federation of Sky, died along with her. Richard Steiner's grief was all-consuming, and by 2475, he declared himself no longer fit to rule the Commonwealth. The Archonship passed to his brother, and Richard would die in battle the following year, fighting with the Draconis Combine over control of the Nox system. Stephen Steiner proved an ineffectual leader, best illustrated by two key events. In early 2488, the Lyran Intelligence Corps launched a series of operations against the Combine without informing the Archon of their plans. Initial success turned to disaster when the Loki agents were caught sabotaging an airbase on Vega. Only when the planetary commander attempted to ransom the individuals back to the Commonwealth did Stephen learn of the operation. His refusal to acknowledge the existence of the shadowy Loki cell resulted in their public execution. Facing increased pressure from the Draconis Combine, the Dukes of Sky and Tamar, Connor Gilderoy and Samuel Natesh, approached the Archon with a proposition. The law prohibited any noble house from raising more troops than the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces had deployed within their territory. If Steiner revoked that law, they could better defend their borders from their aggressive Spinwood neighbours. An increasingly apathetic Steiner caved to their argument, and nobles across the nation went on a spending spree. As Stephen's influence waned, his wife Margaret Olsen's grew. As well as being the Duchess of Gallery, at the time of her marriage she was also the Colonel of the 1st Royal Guards. This gave her a strong power base within both the nobility and the military. When Stephen passed away in 2501 without an heir, Margaret Olsen stepped forward to proclaim herself the new Archon. The only other claimant was the illegitimate son of Tatiana Steiner, Robert. Despite an accomplished career as an aerospace pilot, he lacked the drive to contest his aunt's claim. There was, however, an illness eating away at the heart of the Lyran Commonwealth that would eventually force Robert's hand. An aborted pregnancy back in 2472 seemed to be the cause for a gradual decline in Margaret's mental health. Always something of a mystic, her peculiar behaviour only increased towards the end of the 25th century. Margaret's talk of reincarnation caused much concern within government, but Stephen Steiner had rejected any suggestions that she required medical treatment or therapy. By the time of his passing, a great many charlatans were taking advantage of her, living a life of luxury within the Lyran palaces at the Commonwealth's expense, offering whatever prophecies or advice Margaret most enjoyed hearing. Without Stephen's calming influence, the situation on Tharkad rapidly spiraled out of control. Olsen frequently cited divination or unseen counselors, a euphemism for voices in her head, when justifying her actions as acting head of state. Soon, members of the Estates General approached Robert, and he was forced to take action. Departing from his base at the Polsbo Aerodrome, he arrived at Tharkad in 2503, with several regiments in tow. There, he discovered a court in chaos. Margaret had surrounded herself with wild prophets and other sycophants who fed into her increasingly manic behaviour. But what he did not find was the Archon herself. She had in fact been spirited away by the Duke of Skye ahead of his advance. Taking the situation in hand, on May 22nd, he declared before the Estates General that Olsen was no longer well enough to lead the Lyran Commonwealth, and he would use his forces to bring the rebellious Federation of Skye to order. Most of the armed forces remained neutral in the dispute, focusing instead on safeguarding the Commonwealth's borders. But Robert was able to gather enough of a task force to overcome Duke Conor Gilderoy's expanded house troops. He was robbed of a victory, however, as when he closed on the provincial capital in late 2504, the Duke of Tamar dispatched enough transports to lift Olsen, Gilderoy, and a sizable portion of their mechs off-world, withdrawing them back to the Tamar domains. Robert Steiner arrived at the Tamar capital in April 2505, but by now his troops were thoroughly exhausted. He soon realized that he lacked sufficient strength to overcome the rebel dukes. Judgment Day was forestalled when a ship from the Terran hegemony arrived, hoping to make peace between the two factions. Despite House Cameron's efforts, negotiations fell apart later that night. No sooner had the Terran ambassadors departed, other unknown ships arrived in orbit. There was no time to ascertain their identity as the climactic battle got underway. Just as the advancing Tamar mechs began to come into range, they wavered and then hastily withdrew. Robert Steiner pursued them, only to stumble upon the site of a far larger engagement. The unknown vessels had made landfall on Tamar. Freed from the same restrictions that had been imposed on the Dukes of Skye and Tamar, other loyalist noble houses had also begun building up their own militaries. At this crucial moment, the Duke of Fatima, Nels Reynolds, descended on Olsen's base camp. His surprise attack on the rebel headquarters by fresh troops brought a swift end to the contest. Nels had honoured his grandfather's debt to House Steiner. Some have speculated that House Cameron and Reynolds were in league together, delaying the battle just long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Perhaps this is true, but we can more easily trace their motivation to their actions later that century, where their service as galactic negotiators and conciliators would help them unify the inner sphere behind them. Robert Steiner was sworn in as Archon in 2506. Conor Gilderoy and Samuel Natesh were tried and executed for treason, while the unwell Margaret Olsen, who had seemingly been manipulated by those around her, was sentenced to exile at her home estate on Gallery. The noble houses were ordered to turn over their military equipment to the Lyran Commonwealth, or else disband entirely. The vacant ducal positions for Skye and Tamar were passed on to two trusted families who still rule to this day, Kelsois and Lestrade. House Steiner had narrowly escaped disaster, yet by the end of the 26th century, these allied families would once again be brought to the brink of conflict, following Viola Steiner Dinason's infamous Day of Rage.